A broken weapon, a silent woman, one serial number that should not exist. This story grips like a political conspiracy thriller, turning an ordinary appraisal into a collision with secret missions, federal pressure, and a past designed to stay dead. As Hollis peels back the truth behind Crosswind 7, every detail raises the stakes until a forgotten soldier forces an entire nation to face the cost of its hidden wars.
Hollis held the rifle with just 2 fingers, like he was handling trash. Flakes of rust fell onto the counter. The wooden stock had a crack running right down the middle. Its metal parts were so corroded you could not even identify them. "Ma'am, this is basically scrap metal," he said. "If you tried to shoot it, it would likely just blow up." The other customers in the shop chuckled. The old woman did not move a muscle. "You should probably check the serial number first," she calmly suggested. Hollis smirked. He had been identifying firearms since he was 16 and knew junk when he saw it. But to humor her, he grabbed a brass brush and started scrubbing the receiver. Numbers began to appear through the rust. His hands slowed down. The prefix was completely wrong. It used both letters and numbers, and ended with a dash and an X. He pulled out his phone to check the database. Access was denied. The woman watched him with her remarkably calm eyes. "That serial number will tell you a story," she said softly. "Because officially, that rifle was never supposed to exist, and neither was I." Hollis looked up, truly seeing her for the first time. Who in the world was she? "I would love to know. What city are you tuning in from today? Please leave your location in the comments. If you enjoy stories about the people that history has tried to forget, please subscribe. You will be very glad you did. Because after you only read that entire serial number, a pair of federal agents showed up at his shop within a few hours. And once the old woman told them her story, one of those agents actually saluted her. What could that rifle prove she had done? Dawn broke over the hills of East Tennessee at 6:12 in the morning. The sky turned pink and orange through the mist that covered the valley like a soft blanket. Inside Mercer and Sons Firearms, the fluorescent lights had flickered on at 5:47. That was a full 13 minutes before the sign on the door was meant to be turned to open. Hollis walked around his shop with a natural sense of ownership. He was 26, thin because of a fast metabolism, not from exercise, and he moved like a man who had never been told he was wrong. The gun shop had its usual morning smell. It was a mixture of cleaning solvent, the sweet scent of gun oil, old wood, metal polish, and the faint chemical odor of bluing compound. He poured a cup of coffee from the pot he had started earlier. He drank it black with no sugar, standing at the front counter, while he reviewed the overnight security videos on a tablet. There was nothing to see. There never was. The shop was on a country highway 20 minutes from Knoxville, with only farms and woods for neighbors. Burglaries were not really an issue. Still, Hollis always checked because it was part of his routine. For 643 days, he had followed the exact same steps each morning. Make coffee, check security, and then wipe down the glass display cases. Inside those cases were handguns, all arranged by their time period and brand. There were Colt 1911s, Browning high powers, and a Smith & Wesson Model 29 with nickel plating that had been in the shop longer than Hollis had been alive. He cleaned the glass with straight, horizontal strokes, never with circles. He moved from left to right and from the top to the bottom. His father had taught him that circles always left streaks. Hollis was not sure if it was true, but he maintained the habit. He wore a vintage gunsmith's apron, made of brown leather, that was worn soft at the edges. It had belonged to his grandfather, but Hollis never got a chance to meet him. Cancer had taken him in 1994, 3 years before Hollis was born. The apron felt like a true inheritance, and a confirmation that he belonged there. At 6:30, Hollis walked to the back of the shop, where a locked filing cabinet stood. It was painted olive green, a military surplus item, with a thin coat of dust that never seemed to get thicker. The label on the front, made with an old typewriter, said Estate Archive pre-1980. He had asked his father about it once, a long time ago. His father said it just held old sales records from when his grandfather ran the store. Nothing important at all. The cabinet was always locked. Hollis slid his hand over the dusty top, then wiped his fingers on his jeans. An old rotary phone hung on the wall over the workbench in the back. Its cream-colored plastic had yellowed with age. The cord drooped down in a coil like a snake at rest. In his 643 days at the shop, Hollis had never once heard it ring. He was not even sure if it still worked. It seemed like something that should be thrown away, but his father told him to leave it, so it stayed. A photograph was propped up behind the cash register, squeezed between the counter and the credit card machine. It was a small picture, maybe 4 by 6 inches. The image was out of focus and had faded to a brownish sepia tone. The photograph showed a handful of soldiers posing beside wooden crates deep in a jungle. There were 7 of them in all. Their faces were indistinct, washed out by the glare of the sun or perhaps the fog of memory. Hollis had examined it countless times, but the details always remained elusive. He did not know a single person in the picture. It was simply another relic his dad had told him never to touch. Right at 7 o'clock, his first client arrived. Dale Pritchard, a familiar face, came in with his Remington 700 for its usual 6-week scope tune-up. Dale, in his 60s, was retired from some secret past and loved to fill the air with idle chatter. Hollis clamped the rifle onto his workbench, inspected the barrel, and began tweaking the scope. Dale leaned on the counter, sipping the coffee Hollis offered, a ritual born of habit, not friendship. Heard some folks were snooping around town about old military gear, Dale mentioned. Looked like feds. Dressed in suits with the wrong footwear for this place. That is strange for around here. Hollis kept his eyes on the scope. Collectors ask around sometimes, he said. Not like this, Dale continued. These men had that government air about them. The type you recognize. Too clean, too polite. They were asking about guns from the 70s and 80s. They were very specific about original documentation. For a split second, Hollis's hands froze, his wrench hovering over the scope's turret. He then resumed his work, turning it 2 clicks counterclockwise. It is probably just the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms doing a checkup. It happens occasionally. Dale just shrugged. Maybe. It just felt off. Their conversation drifted to other things. At 7:42, Dale paid in cash for his rifle and left. Hollis returned to his bench and stared blankly for a long minute. He then crossed to the filing cabinet, eyed it for about 10 seconds, and returned to the front. At 9:15, a young pair entered, looking for a carry weapon for the woman. Hollis showed them 3 options: a Glock 43, a Smith & Wesson Shield, and a SIG P365. He explained the differences in magazine capacity, recoil, and how easy each was to hide. The woman chose the Glock, which was a very common choice. Hollis completed the background check and sent them on their way with a box of 9mm bullets and a recommendation for a shooting range nearby. At 10:30, Webb Calhoun came into the shop. Webb was 71, a collector who loved firearms from the Civil War era, and he had more money than sense. He used his retirement to visit gun shows and estate auctions looking for rare pieces. He would stop by Hollis's shop twice a week to talk about his newest finds or his future plans. Hollis tolerated him because Webb spent enough money to make it worth his time. At 11:18, the small bell on the door rang. Hollis looked up from the Colt Python he was polishing and saw an elderly woman come in. She walked with a slow but careful step, as if she were trying to conserve her energy. She had on a canvas jacket from a different time, worn-out jeans, and work boots covered in red mud. Her gray hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. Her face had lines, but it did not look soft. She had high cheekbones. Her eyes scanned the room in a way that seemed very methodical. She was carrying an object wrapped in an old olive-green wool blanket. It was the same color as military gear. Hollis gave her very little notice. Webb was talking about a Springfield trapdoor rifle he had found at an auction in Chattanooga. The woman came to the counter and stood there in silence. She just waited while holding her wrapped bundle. Hollis kept on polishing the python. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. The woman did not answer immediately. She set the bundle on the counter using both of her hands. Her motion was very precise. It did not make a loud noise. It was a careful placement, like someone handling something very fragile or dangerous. She started to unwrap it with deliberate slowness. The rifle was revealed bit by bit. Every visible part was covered in rust. The metal was so dark and oxidized, it looked almost black in some spots. The barrel showed signs of pitting and decay. The wooden stock had a long split that ran its entire length. A crack went from the butt of the rifle to the very front. The wood was swollen and bent from water damage. The rifle looked like it had been pulled from a marsh or a waterlogged basement. Hollis set the python aside. He glanced at the gun, then back at the woman, a gentle smile appearing on his lips. It was not a cruel expression, but one reserved for someone who has made a simple mistake. "Ma'am, I appreciate you showing this to me, but this thing is just junk. Honestly, it is not even safe to put on a wall. The stock is cracked, and the steel is corroded. If you tried to shoot this, it would likely detonate in your face." Over in the next aisle, Webb chuckled softly. "That sounds like a lawsuit looking for a place to happen." Hollis picked up the rifle with 2 fingers, holding it away from his body like it was contaminated. The metal felt gritty under his touch. Little flakes of rust showered the countertop. "I can dispose of it for you," Hollis said, "but it has 0 financial worth. Absolutely nothing." The woman remained silent. She simply observed him with a gaze that was unnervingly steady. Hollis put the rifle down with a solid thud. The sound lingered in the silent store. The 2 other patrons had stopped browsing to watch the exchange. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, a stark contrast to her rugged appearance. "You might want to check the serial number before you throw that out." Hollis laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Ma'am, trust me. I have been doing this since I was 16 years old. I can identify scrap from across the street." She did not move a muscle. Her expression was empty, her eyes locked on his. "The serial number," she repeated firmly. "Just check it." The shop went quiet. Webb's conversation died. The 2 customers near the shotguns were now fully invested. With a heavy sigh, Hollis grabbed a brass brush and a bottle of solvent from his bench. He dampened a rag. "Fine," he said. "Let's see what we have here." He began scrubbing the spot on the receiver where the marking should be. The brush made a harsh, scratching sound on the corroded metal. Dark, rust-colored particles flaked off onto the counter. Little by little, the solvent dissolved the layers of filth. Numbers began to emerge from the muck. Hollis scrubbed harder. The rest of the number appeared. His hands slowed. The serial was strange. It did not start correctly. It was a mix of letters and digits, not just digits. The format was wrong for any civilian firearm. It ended with a dash and a letter. A dash and an X. Hollis went completely still. He stared at the code. GX1847-X. He had never seen a serial number structured like that. Webb leaned closer. "What is it?" Hollis did not answer. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened his valuation app. He entered the number. The app searched for 3 seconds. The screen read, "No match found." He tried a different database for military hardware. The result was just 2 words. "Access restricted. What on earth?" Hollis set his phone down. He walked to the back room without saying anything. The office was small, little more than a closet with a desk, its walls lined with shelves full of books and manuals. He pulled a thick volume from the second shelf. Its title read, "United States Military Small Arms Serial Numbers, 1945 to 1985. The red cover was worn smooth at the edges from long use. He flipped through the pages to the section on serial codes. He scanned the information. Near the bottom of page 347, a small footnote caught his eye. Codes that ended in -X, -Y, or -Z, were designated for experimental or clandestine government programs. Those records were sealed under National Security Directive 47B. Inquiries required a Freedom of Information Act request to the Department of Defense. Hollis read it one more time, then went back out front. The woman stood exactly where he had left her. Her hands rested on the counter as she watched him with an unnerving poise. Hollis picked up the rifle again, this time with great care. He saw it differently now, his expert eye replacing his earlier disdain. "Where did you get this?" His tone had changed completely. "It was a gift." Webb snickered. "A gift? Ma'am." Women were not even allowed in combat back then. The woman turned her head slowly toward Webb. She said nothing. The silence in the room was heavier than any spoken word. Hollis ignored the others. His full attention was on the rifle, seeing it for what it truly was. He took a magnifying glass to the barrel's threading. This was not factory-made. It was a custom job, built with skill. He examined the trigger assembly. It was made with premium components, calibrated for accuracy. His fingertips followed the bolt, searching for unusual wear patterns. The markings hinted at use with a silencer. Next, he studied the stock. Beneath the damaged finish and watermarks, he saw faint etchings. Someone had carved letters, then attempted to remove them. They were barely visible, but still there. Hollis grabbed a set of calipers from a drawer. He measured the chamber and the barrel's rifling. "This was built for long-range work," Hollis murmured. "A match-grade barrel for a specific type of round. It is not a standard-issue rifle. It belonged to a specialist." His voice trailed off. The woman finished the sentence for him. "A sniper rifle from Operation Brushfire, 1973 to 1977, in Laos and Cambodia." The entire gun shop froze. The other two customers stood motionless. Webb's mouth hung open. Hollis could only look at the woman. Officially, the woman continued, her voice flat and emotionless. "We were not there." Hollis felt his own pulse pounding in his ears. Brushfire was a black op. Counterinsurgency. "That whole operation is still classified. Most of it," she agreed. "And most of us, too. We are listed as deceased, or our files were erased." As she spoke, Hollis began to notice details he had overlooked. He saw her stance, her balance perfectly distributed. Her shoulders were squared. A car engine backfired outside, and her head whipped toward the sound in an instant. She assessed the noise, dismissed it as harmless, and relaxed. The terms she used sounded strange coming from her. Phrases like suppressed fire mission, windage calculation, and cold bore zero. It was the precise vocabulary of a professional, not an elderly lady in a local gun shop. Webb finally managed to ask, "Who are you?" "You can call me Ennis." Her choice of words was strange. "Not my name is, but you can call me." "Ennis what?" Hollis asked. "Just Ennis." Hollis pushed the gun back to her side of the counter. "Listen, I am not sure what is happening, but I cannot touch this if it is part of some Black Ops deal. I cannot even give you a quote for it. I am not looking for your services," Ennis answered. "I want to know its value." A nervous chuckle escaped Hollis. "Value? If this is authentic, it is one of about 12 from a defunct program. It could be worth 6 figures. Maybe more. A museum would want it. Then you will sell it for me." Webb stepped closer. "Why now? Why bring it in after all this time?" For the first time, Ennis looked directly at him. Her eyes were a pale gray, almost colorless. Because all this time, no one was looking for it. Now, someone is. As she spoke, her right hand unconsciously drifted to her left arm. She briefly touched the spot through her jacket. The movement was gone in an instant. Hollis's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. The message was from a number he did not recognize. It read, "Who ran serial number GX1847X at 11:34 this morning? Respond now." A cold feeling washed over Hollis. He picked up the phone, read the text again, and then looked at Ennis. She was watching him, her face calm and unsurprised. He turned the phone so she could read the screen. She saw it, but her expression did not change. "You should probably close up early," she said quietly. "And maybe you should not answer that." Webb looked between the two of them. "What is going on?" Hollis did not know what to say. His gaze shifted from the text to the rifle and then to the woman named Ennis. His hands began to shake. He pressed them flat against the counter to steady them. The phone buzzed once more. It was the same unknown number. "This is a national security matter. Provide contact information for the individual with firearm serial GX1847X. Compliance with this directive is mandatory." Hollis dropped the phone like it was hot. Ennis remained perfectly still. She had not moved an inch or changed her expression since she walked in. The bell over the door jingled. Hollis's head shot up. The two other customers were leaving. They both had confused and worried looks on their faces. They left quickly, saying nothing. Webb just stood there, staring at Ennis like she was some kind of ghost. Suddenly, the shop felt smaller, the air thicker, the walls pressing in. Hollis picked up the rifle again, turning it to look at the serial number carved into the polished metal. GX1847X. 8 characters that mattered to people in secure government offices. He set it down gently. "You have no intention of selling this, do you?" It was more of a statement than a question. "No." "Then why are you here?" Ennis gave a small, cold smile. "Because I needed someone to verify it. Someone who would log it into a system. I needed someone who would run a search and trigger an alert. Someone who would prove that this gun is real and that I am still here. You wanted them to find you." "I wanted witnesses," Ennis corrected him. "When they get here, and they are coming, I needed people who could testify about what happened today, to confirm what you saw and what you know." The phone vibrated a third time. Hollis did not pick it up. He could see the message preview on the screen. It read, "Federal agents are en route to your location. Do not move. Do not touch anything. Await their arrival." He looked at Ennis. "They are on their way." "I know. When? Soon." Webb took a slow step away from the counter. "I think I should probably go." "No," Ennis said. Her voice was soft but unyielding. "You need to stay. You are a witness, too." Webb froze in place. Hollis could feel his own heart beating against his ribs. "This is insane. I run a gun shop. I appraise weapons. I have nothing to do with this. You got involved the moment you wiped the grime off that serial number," Ennis told him. "It is far too late to walk away now." Outside, tires crunched on the gravel lot. A vehicle was pulling up. Hollis looked out the front window. It was a black sport utility vehicle with dark windows and official license plates. He whispered, "They are here." Ennis did not even turn around. Her eyes stayed locked on Hollis. "When they ask you questions, tell them the truth. Tell them what you saw, what you verified, nothing more." "What are they going to do to you?" "That depends on how clever they are." The doors of the sport utility vehicle swung open. 2 men emerged. They appeared to be in their mid-40s, fit and dressed in civilian clothes that somehow still identified them as federal agents. It was their shoes, their watches, and the way they surveyed their surroundings. They walked directly toward the shop's entrance. Hollis forgot how to breathe, his mind unable to form a coherent thought. All he could think was, "What mess have I gotten myself into?" The bell on the door chimed softly. The 2 men stepped inside. They carried themselves like soldiers, with deliberate and practiced movements. Their eyes scanned the store methodically. The first man offered a polite, professional smile. "Good afternoon. We are looking for an individual who may have inquired about a specific serial number today." Hollis opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. The second man's eyes landed on the rifle sitting on the counter. A brief flicker of recognition crossed his face before he smoothed it back to a neutral expression. "That is a very unique piece of hardware," the second man said. Would you mind telling me how you came to possess it? Ennis pushed herself away from the wall she was leaning on. She moved with a slow, purposeful grace. Every gesture was measured. Both men turned toward her, saw an older woman in plain work clothes, and dismissed her instantly. They looked back at Hollis. "Sir, we will need you to provide all paperwork for that weapon, and the name of the person who brought it to you." "You are not taking anything," Ennis said. Her voice was quiet. "So you wall. So you wa. So wa. So you. So you. So you. So you. So you. So you." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a new weight. It was full of command, an authority that did not need to ask for respect. The first man barely gave her a glance. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. Please step outside." "GX1847X, Ennis said. "Issued October 1973. Decommissioned February 1977. That rifle has been in my possession for 49 years. If you want paperwork, I have 49 years of it." The second man went rigid. He slowly turned his head to look at her. He was truly seeing her for the first time. His eyes traced the lines on her face, her stance, the absolute certainty in her posture. His entire expression changed. "What was your unit call sign?" he asked carefully. "Crosswind 7. It felt as if all the warmth had been sucked out of the room. The second man's hand twitched, starting to rise toward his head in what looked like the beginning of a salute. He caught himself halfway and lowered it. "My God," he breathed. "What do you think happens next? Let us know in the comments. And if you are drawn to stories about forgotten heroes, please hit subscribe. We have more coming soon." The second agent was completely frozen. His eyes were still locked on Ennis. A full 30 seconds passed in dead silence. Webb was the one who broke it. "What on earth is going on?" The first agent's face had gone pale. He pulled out his phone. "Sir, we need to make a call right now." The second agent did not move or break his intense gaze from Ennis. "They told us you were dead. A training accident in 76. That is what the official files say. I have read the report." Ennis gave a small, grim smile. "That is what the report was meant to say. It is much easier to cancel a program when all the assets have been buried." Hollis finally found his voice again. "What program? What are you all talking about?" The second agent finally looked away from Ennis. He turned to Hollis. "Operation Brushfire. Covert sniper operations in Laos and Cambodia during the final years of the Vietnam War. Officially, it never happened. All the files were sealed or destroyed. Mostly destroyed," Ennis corrected him. "A few of us were just erased." The first agent was now speaking urgently into his phone. He moved toward the back of the shop for privacy, but his voice carried. "Yes, sir. Crosswind 7. She is alive. I can confirm it. The rifle is here. The serial is good. Yes, sir. I am looking right at her." Webb stared, shifting his gaze from Ennis to the two agents. His jaw worked twice before any sound came out. "Are you saying she was a government marksman?" The second agent offered no response to Webb. His eyes remained fixed on Ennis, as if she might vanish if he looked away. "How is this possible? We saw the paperwork on your death. We had witnesses. We have a burial certificate." Ennis slowly and intentionally pulled up her left sleeve. A long, uneven scar appeared. It stretched from her wrist almost to her elbow. It was an old surgical wound, the type left after removing shrapnel. The skin was raised and discolored. Decades of healing had softened it, but the mark was undeniable. "Shrapnel," Ennis stated simply. "The Cambodian border. February 12th, 1977. We were getting extracted by helicopter under fire. Our team lost 2 people that day. I neutralized 11 enemy combatants from 900 meters, using only iron sights after my scope was shattered." She pointed to the rifle on the counter. "This weapon's barrel. This specific rifle. On that exact mission." The second agent's hands had a slight tremor. "Your name is on the memorial wall, in Building C at Langley. I have gone past your name 100 times." "They probably still misspell it," Ennis said flatly. The first agent returned from his phone call. He looked at his partner with an expression that was part confusion and part something that looked like fear. Our orders are to bring her in to a secure location. For an immediate debriefing, Annis let her sleeve fall, once again hiding the scar. No, the first agent blinked. I am sorry? I did not survive 50 years in the shadows just to be disappeared a second time, Annis announced. Her voice was still quiet, but it now carried an unshakable authority. That rifle is authentic. The serial number is on record. There are multiple witnesses in this room. If I vanish, people will start asking questions. So, here is how this will proceed. You will both leave. I will retain my rifle, and when your superiors accept they cannot erase me twice, they can decide if they want this account to surface quietly or very, very loudly. The second agent glanced at his partner. A silent understanding passed between them, born from years of working together. He then faced Annis again. This time, his arm completed the motion it had begun earlier. He delivered a full military salute. It was crisp and perfectly still. Annis did not return the salute, but she offered a single, sharp nod. The agents began moving to the exit. Just before leaving, the second agent paused and looked back. For what it is worth, ma'am, I want to express my gratitude for your service, even if nobody was ever meant to know about it. The door closed behind them. No one in the shop stirred. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Sound itself felt wrong. It was as if time had paused. Webb exhaled a long, shaky breath. That actually happened. That really, truly just happened. Hollis was frozen. His mind struggled to process information that had no place in his version of reality. The woman in his store had been legally dead for nearly 50 years, but she was standing right in front of him, and 2 federal officers had just saluted her. Annis walked to the workbench. She began to reassemble the rifle parts, wrapping them once more in the wool blanket with practiced, efficient movements. I was not truthful earlier, she said. I am not selling it. I only needed an expert to confirm its identity, and now you have. Why? Hollis's voice was shaky. Why do this now, after all this time? Annis stopped her work for a moment, standing perfectly still. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new weight it did not have before. Because they are all passing away. The men who ran Operation Brushfire, the generals who issued the commands, the intelligence officers who planned the missions. They are all old men now, dying and taking the history with them. I wanted someone to know that before the last one is gone, one of us is still here who remembers what we did. Webb stepped a little closer. Were you really? Did you do all the things you mentioned? Annis raised the wrapped rifle, holding it close to her chest like a precious artifact. 9 confirmed kills. 11 probables. Every single one was an enemy soldier. Every single one was to protect my teammates who did not make it home. She touched the rifle gently through the cloth. This is how I served. No one on my team ever questioned my place there, and the enemy certainly knew I belonged. She moved toward the door. The bell chimed as she opened it. Hollis suddenly moved without thinking. Wait. Annis stopped but did not turn around. What happens now? That will depend on how many people believe your story, Annis answered, and how loudly you are willing to tell it. And then she was gone. The door swung closed. The small bell rang one last time. Hollis and Webb stood in silence, looking at the empty doorway. On the workbench, a small glint of light caught his attention. Hollis walked over and saw a single brass shell casing where the rifle had been. She must have left it when she was packing the firearm. He picked it up, rolling it in his fingers. Stamped on the bottom were the words, 7.6, 2x50, 1mm NATO, 1974. It was concrete proof. It was real. Physical evidence. A tiny piece of a war that officially never existed. Webb joined him and looked down at the casing. You believe her? Hollis set the casing back down gently. Yes, I do. What are you going to do? I have absolutely no idea. His phone buzzed. It was another text message from the same blocked number. You will not discuss this incident with anyone. National security protocols are in effect. Any violation will result in federal prosecution. Hollis held the phone out for Webb. Webb read the text, then let out a sharp, nervous laugh. So they were resorting to threats. That part was obvious. Hollis looked at the brass casing, then at the old picture near the cash register. He glanced at the locked filing cabinet in the corner, which now seemed to hold an impossible weight. I do not know, he said again, his voice low. Webb had departed 20 minutes ago, muttering that he needed a stiff drink, maybe an entire bottle. Hollis had locked the shop door right after him, turning the sign to closed at just 1 p.m. He stood by himself in the quiet. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed. The normal smell of cleaning solvent and wood polish hung in the air, just like every other day. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. Hollis walked to the filing cabinet and simply stared at it. The lock was old, one he could easily open. He possessed the tools and the knowledge, a skill he had learned with gunsmithing, but he did not pick the lock. He went to the drawer beneath the register instead. He pulled out the spare key ring his grandfather had always stored there. There were 7 keys on it. He recognized most of them immediately. Keys to the shop, the gun safe, the glass cases. But one was unfamiliar. It was small and made of brass, clearly designed for a filing cabinet. Hollis returned to the cabinet and inserted the key. It slid in and turned without effort. The lock made a soft clicking sound as the drawer came free. Inside, dozens of manila folders were filed by year, their tabs neatly labeled in perfect handwriting. There were deployment schedules, supply requisitions, and mission-after-action reports. Hollis pulled a folder out at random and opened it. It was a request for weapons dated April 1974 for specialized 7.62 NATO rounds. The destination was listed as Firebase Hotel, but the map coordinates were blacked out. The authorizing signature was illegible, stamped with an official seal he had never seen before. He opened another file. This one contained a mission report from August 1975. A target was taken out at extreme range, followed by a successful team extraction. The operative was identified only as Crosswind 7. Hollis set the folder down. His hands were shaking again. His grandfather's business was more than a simple gun store. It had been a supply point for covert operations. His grandfather was a part of brushfire. Hollis looked at the photograph behind the counter, taking it out of its frame with a new and chilling clarity. 7 soldiers stood in uniform in a jungle clearing, their features obscured by shadow. One figure was slightly shorter than the others. He now saw the familiar posture. It was Annis. 49 years ago, standing with her unit. Hollis flipped the photograph over. Faded ink on the back read, Crosswind Unit, April 1975, after Firebase Hotel resupply. May they all come home. But they did not all come home. Hollis collapsed onto a stool at the counter and put his head in his hands, struggling to process it all. His phone rang. It was an actual call this time, not a text. The number was unknown. He answered it. Mr. Hollis, a voice said. My name is Colonel Marcus Reeves, retired. I understand you had a visitor today who might have raised some questions. The voice was old but firm, with a distinct military cadence. I do not know what I am supposed to say, Hollis replied. You should hear this, Reeves explained. The woman who visited your shop belonged to a secret project that protected American lives. Her team operated where we officially could not, doing work we could never acknowledge. When the project ended, they were given 2 options. They could vanish into new lives with our complete backing, or they could endure public trials that would destroy their reputations. Nearly all of them chose to vanish. She has returned now because we are fading away, Reeves went on. The few of us who understand the truth, who know their sacrifices, are getting old. We are running out of time. If no one speaks up, the story will be lost forever. But why my shop? Why bring her rifle here? Because your grandfather was the one who equipped the Brushfire project. The proof of its existence is hidden in your shop's records. And you are young, so you can keep the story alive when we are no longer here. Hollis closed his eyes. What is it you need from me? You need to tell the truth, Reeves instructed. At the proper moment, tell everyone what you verified. Let them know the rifle is authentic, its serial number is legitimate, and the woman who carried it was a hero. But what if people think I am lying? Hollis wondered. They will listen. We are pushing to have the files declassified. It will only be a partial release, but it will be enough. In a couple of months, some details about Brushfire will become public. Your testimony will be crucial then. You will be confirming a piece of history. What happens if I refuse? In that case, heroes will stay forgotten, Reeves stated. And that would be a profound injustice. The phone call ended. Hollis remained seated, motionless. The familiar shop suddenly felt claustrophobic and confining. His gaze shifted to the brass shell on his workbench, then to the picture, and the cabinet of secrets his father had always ignored. His whole world was founded on things left unspoken. The business was just a business. His grandfather was just an entrepreneur. The vintage rotary phone was a simple ornament. It was all a deception. Or perhaps not deceptions, but careful omissions. Details hidden away to maintain the appearance of an ordinary life. Hollis got up and went to the rotary phone, just looking at it. For 643 days, that phone had remained completely silent. Now, it seemed poised to ring at any second. It stayed quiet. He went back to his workbench and lifted the brass shell, angling it toward the light. The casing gleamed in the artificial light. The stamped digits were still clear after 5 decades. It was military spec. An individual had discharged this bullet. A person had chambered the round, judged the wind and range, steadied their breath, and pulled the trigger. Through a scope, they witnessed a projectile cross 900 meters to take a life. That individual was the calm, older woman who was supposed to have been deceased for 49 years. Hollis set the shell down, pulled out his smartphone, and started a new entry. He started writing. On November 14th, a customer named Ennis came in with a rifle, serial number GX1847X. Confirmed it was a prototype military sniper weapon. The system flagged the feds. 2 of them showed up. She was identified as Crosswind 7. A field agent from the covert Operation Brushfire. Her skill and the scar from shrapnel were absolute proof. The agents even gave her a salute. Here was the evidence of a hero erased from the records, a wrong he was now part of. He secured every piece of proof. Just then, the chime on the door rang. Hollis's pulse jumped, and his hand moved toward the handgun beneath the register. A man in his 80s came inside, leaning on a cane and dressed in an old military jacket adorned with unfamiliar patches. His gaze swept the area, resting on a photograph and finally on Hollis. "You must be the grandson," the man stated, not asking. "I am. Your grandfather gave us support when we had none. May I ask who you are?" The visitor moved forward deliberately. "You received a guest not long ago, a lady with a rifle. How is that possible?" "I got a message about an hour back saying Crosswind 7 had surfaced. I needed to see for myself." "You are acquainted with her?" The old man nodded. "I was in her unit, back in February of 1977. I was the pilot on the chopper that extracted her crew. We were taking heavy fire on approach. She gave us cover from a ridge above. I have never seen shooting like that before, or since. 11 hostiles down in roughly 90 seconds. Perfect shots." He looked over at the photo. "That picture includes me. I am the third man from the left." Hollis studied the photograph, locating the person the man indicated. The figure was taller, with an unmistakable military stance even in the blurry image. "You were actually there. 4 tours of duty, the visitor confirmed, in locations I can't name, alongside people I'm supposed to erase from memory. But I never erased her. Crosswind 7 was the best operative I ever knew. So why are you here now? Her return signals that something major is developing. A file declassification, maybe. If they are finally being acknowledged, there are things you should understand. This is about your grandfather and what this shop was really for. From inside his coat, the man produced a sealed, time-stained envelope. Your grandfather entrusted this to me in 1978. He said I should give it to the shop's new owner if he passed, or if someone started asking about brush fire. He believed the right person would understand. The visitor handed Hollis the envelope. Its wax seal was untouched. Across the front, his grandfather's handwriting read, "For the one who carries the legacy." "What is in here?" Hollis asked. "The truth," the man stated, "or as much as he was able to document. It contains names, dates, and operations. It's the proof that they existed." "Then why didn't you open it?" "It was not my place. Besides, some truths are dangerous. Your grandfather knew that. He saved the history, but kept it hidden to protect people." As he turned to go, the man stopped at the door. "Tell her I have not forgotten," he said. "Let Crosswind 7 know that Pelican 3 remembers, and that I am glad she made it out." Then he was gone, the bell above the door marking his exit. Hollis stood alone, clutching the letter. The ancient paper felt impossibly fragile, like it might crumble into dust. He set it on the counter and stared. The familiar hum of the lights, the smell of gun oil, the slant of the afternoon sun were all the same. Nothing in the room had changed, but his entire world had just shifted. Finally, Hollis picked up the envelope and broke the seal. Inside he saw old photos, official-looking documents, and handwritten notes. He found a weapons logbook with dates and drop points, maps with coordinates circled, and mission briefs typed on an old machine. There was also a letter from his grandfather, written to no one in particular. It started, "If you are holding this, the right person is finally connecting the forbidden dots. That is a good thing. Our work was necessary." The soldiers of Operation Brushfire kept Americans safe. They operated in places that would destroy most people. They took on missions with no possibility of extraction. And when their job was done, they were simply discarded. The government gave them new names and told them to forget what they did. But some things must be remembered. Some acts of courage deserve to be honored, no matter if it takes 50 years. This shop was their lifeline. I supplied them with weapons, ammunition, and specialized equipment. I knew a few of them and what they were doing, but I could never say a word. Every single one was a hero. If their story is coming to light, make sure it is told correctly and completely. Do not let politicians erase what they did. The packet also contained a small brass key, different from the one for the gun cabinet. A tag attached to it read, "Safe Deposit Box at First National Bank in Knoxville, Box 347. More proof is waiting there. Use it when the time is right." Hollis spread everything out, gazing at the evidence that now covered his counter. He looked at pictures of young men in jungle fatigues and papers stamped with warnings like classified and eyes only. He did not recognize the names, but he felt their significance. His phone buzzed with a text from Ennis. "So, the pilot paid you a visit. Good. You are starting to see the full picture. You will be ready when the declassification is announced. Thank you for trusting me." Hollis texted back, "Why involve me in this?" Her reply came instantly. "Because your grandfather left you this responsibility, even if you did not know it. Because you sought the truth when it would have been easier to ignore. Because the story needs a witness. And I am tired of being a ghost." Hollis collapsed into a chair, the weight of it all hitting him at once. His morning had been normal. Coffee at 6 o'clock, a systems check, and polishing glass cases. Now he held proof of a secret war and was talking to a woman who had been erased from history. Just then, the old rotary phone started to ring. Hollis jumped and stared at the device. Its ring was a harsh mechanical shriek from another time. It rang again. He stood up, walked across the shop, and picked up the heavy receiver. "Hello?" A wave of static gave way to a formal voice of an older man. "This line has been inactive for 38 years. Its ringing signals that the emergency protocol is active. Are you the grandson?" "I am." "Then listen very carefully. Operation Brushfire is about to be partially declassified. It becomes public in 6 weeks, with a congressional hearing in 8 weeks. We need witnesses to verify the program's reality, people who have evidence and credibility. Your grandfather set up this system as a failsafe. This phone was designed to ring if the operatives ever needed someone to speak for them. Whoever answers becomes their advocate. Who is this?" "Someone who owes them a great debt," the man said. "Get ready. You will be called to testify. Bring the documents. Bring the rifle's serial number. Bring the truth." The line went dead. Hollis put the phone back in its cradle. He noticed his hand was trembling. A deep quiet settled over the shop again, a heavy silence that felt like the building itself was holding its breath. He looked at the items on his counter. The proof, the story, the truth. He had 6 weeks until the public announcement, and 8 weeks until the hearing. 8 weeks to prepare to tell the story of soldiers who had been invisible for 50 years. Hollis studied the photograph again, trying to see the faces more clearly. The team stood near wooden crates somewhere in the jungle. They were just kids, doing dangerous work in a place they were never supposed to be. One had survived and was still fighting for recognition, and now, whether he liked it or not, he was part of that fight. The brass bullet casing gleamed in the light. It was a small thing with a huge meaning, a shot fired half a century ago that was still traveling to its target. Hollis locked the file cabinet, gathered the papers, and placed them in the safe. The bank would be his first stop in the morning. He had to retrieve the items from box 347, organize the evidence, and prepare what he would say. For tonight, he would just sit in the silent shop and absorb how his family's history had been rewritten in just 6 hours. He put the old photograph back on the wall, but this time in a fine frame with a proper plaque. He set the bullet casing in a velvet-lined display box with a small card that read, 7.6 to NATO. 1974. Operation Brushfire. A round fired to defend American lives. Found by Crosswind 7. It was real evidence, the truth made solid. If this story means something to you, please share it with others. And if you believe that forgotten heroes deserve a voice, subscribe for more stories about people who need to be remembered. 6 weeks passed in a blur. Hollis worked tirelessly in the shop's back room, putting the long-hidden records in order. The safe deposit box contained everything his grandfather's note had promised. Inside were mission debriefs, there were deployment orders, and there were clear photographs of the operatives, whose faces he could finally see. He found the real names that corresponded to the code names. Crosswind 7 was Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage. She was just 23 years old when she went to fight. She was 27 when she vanished from all official records. The declassification was made public on a Tuesday in January. The Department of Defense released a brief, sterile statement acknowledging Operation Brushfire as a limited special program active from 1973 to 1977. A few records were unsealed. A hearing was set for February 15th to review the operation. Less than an hour later, Hollis's phone rang. It was Colonel Reeves. He explained that the hearing committee needed someone to confirm the program was real. He instructed Hollis to prepare his testimony and bring the physical proof. He stressed how important it was. Hollis gave his word that he would be there. 3 days after that, a package with no return address arrived at his shop. Inside, Hollis found a letter from Ennis in a neat, firm hand. "Thank you for believing in us," it read. "As I promised, the rifle is now with the Smithsonian. They are building an exhibit around it. Operation Brushfire. Shadows in Service will open in March. You should be there for the dedication. You've earned that right." Along with the letter was a new photo. It showed the rifle in a museum case, cleaned and perfectly displayed. The placard read, GX 1847X, sniper rifle used in covert operations, 1973 to 1977, carried by Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, Crosswind 7. Her name was finally out in the open. Hollis hung the new photograph on the wall right beside the old one of her unit. 2 pictures, a lifetime apart. A woman who lived in the shadows was at last stepping into the light. The shop felt new. Customers still came for supplies, but Hollis now understood that some things are much more than they seem. Hollis posed intelligent questions and paid close attention to the answers. He would weigh every detail before reaching a conclusion. Webb came by 2 times a week, but never mentioned the events of that November day. He would, however, glance at the wall photos, the encased brass shell, and then at Hollis with a look of admiration. The morning of February 15th was crisp and sunny. Hollis had traveled to Washington the previous day, getting a hotel room near Capitol Hill, but sleep was impossible. He rehearsed his statement over and over. He contemplated the weight of revealing a secret kept for 50 years. The room for the hearing was smaller than he expected. It featured wood paneling, chairs for guests, and a long desk at the front for 5 members of Congress. Video crews were set up on both sides. The room held about 40 individuals. Hollis arrived with time to spare, chose a seat at the rear, and observed the attendees file in. He knew some of their faces from the photographs. They were elderly now, in their 80s. Some required wheelchairs. Others relied on canes. Each one displayed a symbol of their former service, such as a jacket with squadron patches or a cap with a worn insignia. Their dignity was clear, mingled with the weight of the decades they had to remain silent. At 9:15, Ennis entered. She wore a plain dark suit, her hair was tied back, and she walked with the same careful poise Hollis recalled. Yet, something about her had changed. Her posture was straighter. She held her head with more confidence, as though a heavy burden had finally been lifted. She took a seat in the first row, never glancing around or acknowledging anyone. She just sat there, hands clasped, and waited. The proceedings began at 9:30. A woman in her 60s, the committee chairperson, spoke first. She acknowledged the delicate nature of the subject, the long period of secrecy, and the immense sacrifices made by agents who served without any credit. She then introduced the first person to testify, a retired general of 82. An assistant helped him to the witness stand. He affirmed that Operation Brushfire had been a vital strategic measure. He detailed the lives it protected, the information it gathered, and the objectives it achieved. He talked for 20 minutes. His voice had a surprising amount of strength. After he finished, he made direct eye contact with Ennis and offered her a single, resolute nod. The next individual to speak was the pilot known as Pelican 3, the same man from Hollis's store. He talked about rescue operations and the agents who performed their duties in circumstances that defied all standard protocols. He recalled their composure under attack and a specific operation in February of 1977. One agent's suppressive fire was the sole reason his crew survived. He never mentioned Ennis by name. It was unnecessary. The entire room understood who he was describing. Hollis was called as the third witness. He approached the table, placed his document folder down, was sworn in, and took his seat. The chairperson requested he state his name and explain his involvement with Operation Brushfire. I am Hollis Mercer. I own a firearm business in Tennessee that my grandfather managed during the time of Brushfire. This past November, a woman came into my business for an appraisal on a rifle. Its serial number was GX1847X. A database search confirmed the weapon was restricted government property. The woman then identified herself as the agent to whom that rifle was assigned. Federal agents arrived within hours to verify who she was. I later found papers in my grandfather's files proving his shop was a support depot for brush fire. The chairman asked if Hollis had brought any tangible evidence. Hollis opened his folder, lifting a brass casing from its clear box. This was left behind by the operative. It is a 1974 7.62 NATO round fired during a mission my grandfather noted in his records. He set it on the table before showing them the photographs. The crosswind unit from 1975, weapon request forms, and post-mission reports. He laid it all out. This shows Operation Brushfire was not a myth, that these people served, succeeded, and are owed their due. The committee reviewed the proof, passing items between them. They asked how it was verified, who held it for so long, and how Hollis knew it was authentic. My grandfather was meticulous, Hollis explained. He knew the truth would eventually need a defender. He believed these people mattered. The chairman nodded. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. These documents will now become part of the official record. Hollis returned to his seat, his hands shaking from a surge of adrenaline and relief. The chairman then summoned the last witness, Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, also known as Crosswind 7. A hush fell over the entire room. Ennis rose, approached the witness table with her usual measured gait, sat, and was sworn in. Her voice was completely firm. The chairman spoke gently. Lieutenant Carthage, we appreciate your willingness to come forward. We understand this is challenging, given your service and your erasure from the records. For our proceedings, can you state your name and service designation? My name is Sarah Ennis Carthage. I was Crosswind 7 for Operation Brushfire, from October 1973 until February 1977. I operated as a sniper, completing 42 assignments. I had 9 confirmed kills and 11 probables, all hostile combatants. Each engagement was to defend American forces, the chairman went on. This committee has reviewed classified mission files that refer to your designation. Yet, according to official military files, you died in a training incident in 1976. Could you clarify that discrepancy? Ennis's face remained a stoic mask. When Brushfire was dismantled, its operatives were offered 2 options. We could endure a congressional inquiry, revealing classified methods still active, or we could adopt a new life and vanish. I chose to vanish. My staged death was the mechanism for that change. And why have you chosen to speak out now? Because the officials who gave us that choice are now old and frail. Because their loved ones have a right to understand their true legacy. And because I am done being a ghost. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, the first crack in her composure Hollis had ever seen. The panel conferred in low tones. The chairman then spoke to her once more. Lieutenant Carthage, this committee acknowledges your duty and what it cost you. We understand the extraordinary situation you faced and the injustice of your official erasure. It is our formal recommendation that you and all Brushfire operatives be awarded the Intelligence Star for courage in secret operations. An intense, sudden quiet fell over the chamber. Then an elderly man in the first row stood up. He lifted his hand into a flawless military salute. Another man rose and did the same. In under 30 seconds, all the veterans in attendance were standing, their hands raised for a woman erased 50 years ago. Enos did not move from her chair or return the salute. Her eyes, however, moved across the room, seeing old comrades and recalling shared history. The chairman and the other committee members then stood. While they did not salute, they showed their deep respect. The stillness lasted for 20, then 30 seconds. Enos finally stood. She gave the room one deliberate nod, turned, and left, bringing the hearing to a close. Hollis was frozen in his seat, completely astonished. He watched the veterans drop their salutes, sit down, and wipe away tears. Webb, just in front of him, turned his head, caught his eye, and nodded. An entire conversation happened in that silent moment. Out in the hallway, Hollis found Enos alone, gazing at the city through a large window. Her hands were clasped behind her back in a formal military posture. That was brave, Hollis said. Without looking away from the window, she replied, "It was long past time. What happens now? A ceremony at Arlington. It is planned for next month. Our names will be added to the Brushfire Monument. There are 17 of us remaining. We will all go." And after that she finally faced him, offering a slight, authentic smile. "Then I am done hiding. I may write a book, or maybe I will just enjoy a quiet life, content that the truth has been told. But I will not be invisible again." Hollis extended his hand. "I appreciate you trusting me." Enos shook it firmly. "And I appreciate you believing me when it was easy to dismiss." She then went down the hall to where the veterans were waiting near the elevators. The pilot gave her a quick, warm hug. She was soon enveloped by the others, all sharing stories and showing their gratitude. By the next day, Hollis had returned to Tennessee. His shop looked the same on the outside, but inside it felt transformed, like it now had a higher purpose. He used the entire next week to reorganize. The file cabinet was moved against the wall behind his counter, and he left it unlocked for good. He made a new sign for it that read, "Historical Archive, Operation Brushfire." Patrons could now notice it, ask questions, and learn the story. The vintage rotary phone hung on the wall, quiet again. But to Hollis, it was far more than a decoration. It was a monument to the fact that certain connections endure through the years, and some stories need decades to be heard. His wall of pictures expanded. Beside the original Crosswind team photo, he hung new images: Enos at the hearing, the rifle in the Smithsonian, and a shot from Arlington of 17 veterans in formation for the last time. Hollis included a final picture from the museum's ceremony in March. The photo showed Enos next to the rifle's display case. One hand rested on the glass, her attention focused on the weapon that had defined 4 years of her life and the 49 years of silence that followed. In the image, she was smiling. About 3 months after the hearing, a young woman in her early 20s came into the store. She seemed nervous and carried a battered duffel bag. "My grandmother passed away last month," she began. She said if I ever got into a tight spot with money, to bring this to someone who would understand its real value. She gave me this address. She pulled an old M1911 handgun out of her bag. It was dull, the grip was smooth from handling, and the serial number was faint. Hollis saw the woman's worry that he might turn her away. He picked up a brass brush. "Let me take a look at that." She observed him as he carefully cleaned the serial number. "Did your grandfather also do this kind of thing?" she asked. "He did, and he showed me that true value is rarely visible at first glance. It is often hidden by rust, age, and neglect. You have to look a little deeper to find what is truly important." The serial number began to emerge, digit by digit. It was a standard issue firearm from 1943. The condition suggested it saw action in World War II, probably in the European or Pacific theaters. It was not an uncommon model, but it was meaningful. This was carried by a soldier, Hollis said, someone who depended on it in a desperate time. That gives it a kind of worth that money cannot buy. The young woman's posture softened with relief. "What do you suppose it is worth?" Hollis set down the brush. "To a collector, perhaps $800. To your family, it is invaluable. This is a piece of your heritage. Your grandmother wanted you to have this. You should keep it, to honor your family's past." A smile broke through as her eyes misted over. "Thank you." After she was gone, Hollis looked around his shop. The photographs, the archive cabinet of secrets, the brass shell in its case, and the still rotary phone. The shop was now everything his grandfather had dreamed of, but never saw realized. It had become a place for forgotten histories to surface, for neglected objects to find their value, and for honesty to outweigh ease. At 5:47, Hollis began his end-of-day routine. The steps were familiar, but his motivation had changed completely. He wiped down the glass cases with focused care, checked the security footage, and updated his business records. Just before heading out, he stopped at the wall of photographs. He saw Enos at the museum, the Crosswind team, and the service at Arlington. 17 operators, their lives once wiped from existence, were now finally restored to the light. These 17 soldiers had served in secret, and at last they were being honored. Hollis picked up the brass shell casing, turning it between his fingers. 7.62 NATO, 1974, fired 5 decades ago. This tiny artifact, saved and brought home, was solid proof that some truths never die. He placed it back in its display, turned off the lights, and secured the door. The Tennessee evening settled in as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Traffic on the nearby highway faded, and the world continued on, unaware of the small shop that now guarded secrets that had become history. Hollis paused in his truck for a moment before starting the engine. He glanced at the dark storefront, reading the Mercer and Sons firearms sign. It represented 3 generations with 3 unique purposes. First a depot, then a shop, and now a monument. His phone buzzed with a message from Enos. It read, "I noticed you were credited as a historical consultant at the museum. The exhibit is bringing in 20,000 visitors each month. People are hungry for these stories. Thanks for making this possible." Hollis replied, "The honor was all mine. Thank you for trusting me with the truth." He put the truck in drive and pulled out, his mind on old firearms, secret documents, and the weight of keeping a secret for 50 years. He reflected on the courage it required to return from obscurity, and his grandfather's unwavering faith that the truth would eventually be valued. Hollis unlocked the shop at 5:47 the next day. While his morning tasks were identical, his entire outlook was transformed. He now saw his work as a calling, a connection to a purpose far greater than just commerce. At 900, a man entered carrying a rifle he wanted appraised. The firearm was beaten up and appeared worthless, but Hollis did not dismiss him. Instead, he took it gently, examined it meticulously, and gave the owner's story his full attention. He had learned that value is often concealed, that history lives in overlooked items, and that every narrative deserves respect. Sunlight struck the brass casing on the counter, its shine a steady reminder. A bullet might take 50 years to hit its target, and a truth can lie dormant for just as long. A person can emerge from a lifetime of shadows, and a humble gun shop in Tennessee can prove that secrets do not last and the truth always surfaces. The photographs on the wall bridged the gap between yesterday and today. What was once secret was now known. A phantom had become a person. The world now knew Crosswind 7 was Sarah Enos Carthage, and her legacy was secure. From behind the counter, Hollis regarded the old rifle, the waiting customer, and the room that taught him to look deeper. He approached the task with the same mindset he now applied to everything, with patience and reverence, knowing the worthless can be priceless, the damaged can be whole, and an ending can be a new beginning. Light filled the shop, with the smell of oil and aged wood. The pictures watched over him, the records were open, and the story was protected. And in that light was the memory of an elderly woman placing a rusty firearm on his counter, a simple gesture that changed everything. Have you ever witnessed an underdog finally get the recognition they were denied for so long? Share that story of justice in the comments below. And if you believe that truth is worth fighting for, no matter the time past, please subscribe. These stories have earned the right to be heard. These heroes have earned the right to be remembered. And silence should never be the final word.